All right, well, we're lucky today to have two awesome presenters, Dave Wiley and John Hilton, both associated with our department in one way or another. I was a little confused when I came in because I saw this piece of technology and thought maybe they were, going back to the old school 70s, just
90s.
Is that 90s?
I sure used it in high school.
Yeah. Anyway, we're glad to have them here. Both of these two scholars are doing cutting-edge research in open educational resources, in the area of open educational resources. In fact, I just sent out this morning, the BYU News has article on some of the research they've done. That was last year, right? The article that they were reporting on.
One last year and one this year.
One last year and one this year. And they're just doing some really great work. So I hope that you listen carefully to them. And if you're interested in getting involved in the OER research, I'm sure they'll share ways that you can do that. John will be teaching a class in the winter on OER research for those who want to be involved. And actually, I think you can take it anywhere from 1 to 3 credits, right? So if you want to be involved, and the 3 credit end is where you're not just going to do the readings, but you're actually going to be involved in doing research that they're involved in. So hope if you're interested in that you take advantage of that opportunity. And without further ado, I'll turn the time over to you two to present.
So I think it's fun to point out that John and I are both graduates from this program. So once upon a time we were like you. Wait,
And don't both of you hold the record for the fastest time in PhD?
I can neither confirm it. So anyway, it's always fun. It's always fun to be with you guys. So I'm going to set a little context, and then John's going to talk about some studies, and I'm going to talk about some studies. By show of hands, how many of you feel like you're fairly familiar with open educational resources? Okay, so we do need to do this. So I apologize to those of you who are familiar for the next 5 minutes. So OER stands for Open Educational Resources. There are a number of definitions, but probably the most popular is the one that's been put forth by the Hewlett Foundation. And it's probably the most popular because they've funded the most work in OER. But you'll see it has to do with, where's my pointer? So teaching, learning, and research resources that meet one of 2 conditions. Either they're in the public domain, or they've been released under an IP license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. And then it goes on to say teaching and learning and research resources could be things like courses, course materials, modules, textbooks, videos, research articles, a wide range of things. Thank you. So I was a student in this program, John was a student in this program, John was my student in this program, and John is what we refer to as a block off the old chip. He will keep me straight here. So what problem is OER trying to solve? The idea of open maybe sounds interesting or fascinating, but what are the problems really? So there's a wide range of them, but they all really have to do with either cost, access, and affordability, or pedagogical flexibility, kind of broadly speaking. Either there's inadequate access to resources like in developing countries, or for non-traditional learners, for people who want to work in an informal learning environment, or governments don't have enough money to spend to buy K-12 learning materials because they're too expensive, or we don't have enough money to buy textbooks in higher ed because you have to pay for them and they're too expensive. Average borrower, this is student loan figure, average borrower owes about $30,000. That total number is over $1 trillion now. You'll see this is consumer credit. This is student loan debt. It's up $1.3 trillion. And what's special about student loan debt? I hope you guys all know this question. It's unforgivable. You can't get rid of it in bankruptcy. You can't, it's not like mortgage debt or credit card debt. It will live a long life with you. When you look at the components of what goes into that debt, there's tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, personal expenses, transportation, the things that are included in kind of government total cost to graduate figures that are used to calculate financial aid. All of these things are extremely hard to deal with the possible exception of books and supplies. Like, it takes an act of Congress or someone more powerful than that to change tuition, it seems like. What do we do about room and board? Do we build more buildings? I don't know what we do, but professors choose their textbooks. This is a place that we can attack pretty directly. This is the consumer price index for the last couple of decades. This is the price of textbooks for the last couple of decades. You can see it's up over 600%. And this is from Bureau of Labor Statistics. There are different versions of this slide you'll see with different data, but they all look like this. Relatively flat kind of growth in broad consumer prices, and textbooks kind of up and to the right in a crazy way. Here's some data from NBC News. Over 1,000% since '77. Yes.
I got a question.
Yes.
Hey, could textbooks be getting more expensive because people are actually using them less?
There's a vicious cycle in which a publisher, which is the major publishers or publicly traded companies, have earning expectations to hit. And when people buy fewer textbooks, the only way to hit those expectations is to do what? Raise the price of books. And when you raise the price of books, what will students do? They'll buy even fewer, which then means you have to do what? Raise the price even more. So there's this kind of death spiral around student purchasing behavior and prices.
There are other forces that are driving them.
There's a wide range of, this market is so broken, right? It's like, the only market that really kind of compares to this is prescription drugs, right? So when you go to the doctor and the doctor says, you're sick and you need this drug, and I'm writing its name on a piece of paper, and you take this to the pharmacy, that is the drug you can get, and whatever it costs, you will pay. You can't comparison shop. You can't kind of browse the aisle and look at the packages and read the labels and decide you want this one instead of that one. Textbooks, the faculty member says, this is the book you will buy. They don't have to, we don't pay for textbooks. So the person making the choice is kind of price insensitive, but students are really price sensitive. It's like if I could say, you're going to buy this car, congratulations. Or you're going to buy this house, or the number of ways in which the textbook market is broken and weird are numerous. These are these the GAO numbers? These are College Board numbers. Average student will be will be asked to spend somewhere between $1,200 and $1,300 a year on textbooks. And these data, this is from Minnesota State University. These next are from a Florida Virtual Campus Survey. But, over half of students report that they've waited for a financial aid check to come before they're able to purchase textbooks, which means now I'm a week or 2 or 3 behind. Haven't been able to do the readings, class is going on, waiting for my book to come through. 2/3 of students report they've not purchased required textbooks because of cost. Half of students have taken fewer courses because of the cost of textbooks. You can see that over 1/4 of students say that they've had to drop a course over the price of textbooks. So this is part of the problem that OER is trying to solve, OER are trying to solve. So the one way of thinking about a solution to that is to take lots of the open educational resources that are available in the world, package them up into something that looks like a textbook, and use that textbook in place of the textbook you had been adopting before. And these are some examples. These books in the middle are from a project called OpenStax out of Rice University, stacks with an X. The kind of functioning definition here being kind of bundles of material that are comparable to traditional textbooks, but again, either reside in the public domain or have been published under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing. You keep seeing this idea of copyright and licensing coming back through all these definitions. Why a textbook? Why not something more innovative? And part of the reason part of the answer to this question is that faculty know how to adopt textbooks. And just as part of the change management process, we have to invite people to make the smallest possible change from where they are forward. And so instead of talking about OER, talking about open textbooks sometimes makes that easier to do. This is a project out at University of Minnesota called Open Textbook Library, where they archive OER that have been brought together as complete textbook replacements. There's about 200 books in that catalog. And they also provide small grants to faculty to write peer reviews of those textbooks. So you can go and you can search by 5-star rating and read reviews that have been written according to rubrics. And in terms, one of the frequently asked questions about OER is, why on earth would somebody spend all the time to produce a complete textbook replacement or a series of videos or whatever it is that they've done and put that available out in the open and not ask for royalties for it and not put traditional copyright on it? And the answer to that is partly that there is a wide range of funding available for the production of open educational resources, from universities that run internal grant programs or foundations that have programs around funding OER, government grants. The Trade Adjustment Act grant from Department of Labor a few years ago was a $2 billion pool of money released over 4 years that had a requirement that all the educational materials produced as part of that grant be published under an open license. Professional organizations. There are a number of places you can go for funding, to get funded to write an open textbook or to create open educational resources. And then there are people who do it without funding at all for completely different reasons. So there's an economist at Berkeley who was done wrong by a publisher of a previous book of his, and so he decided he was going to stick it to the man and start writing economics textbooks that he would just make available because he could, and take that, so there. So there's a wide range of reasons why. So the open, to hammer this point home one more time, we've talked about public domain or intellectual property license a couple of times now. What does the open and open textbooks really mean? It's really a two-part definition. The first part being that the materials are completely free to access. You don't have to pay to get a copy of them. You don't have to pay royalties to use them. But that's almost kind of uninteresting because the entire internet is free for you to use and access and read. CNN is free, National Geographic is free, the New York Times is free, BBC is free, ESPN.com is free, Wikipedia is free. It's free, but it's free plus. We don't just mean free, we mean free plus a copyright license that grants you, that didn't transfer well, that grants you a set of permissions that we call the 5R permissions. And so let me read these out for you. So these are retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. So material that comes to you, either a video or an essay or a chapter or a textbook, that gives you permission to make your own copy, which you can keep and control forever, and it never deletes itself off of your e-reader. Its password never stops working. It's an actual file that you download and you control and own. You have permission to use it in a broad range of ways. You can crack it open, and if you don't like the example about weather in the, in the Midwest. Thank you, John. If you don't like the example of weather in the Midwest, you can just backspace over all of that and delete the photo and write some new words about weather in Utah or Florida or wherever. So you can make adaptations and modifications to it so they'll speak more directly to your students with examples that they understand better. Remix is about taking maybe 3 chapters from here and an essay from there and a couple of videos from over here and putting those together into a new thing, into a mashup. And then redistribute is the permission that you're given to, whether it's the original copy that you made or the revised copy or the mashup that you created, you always have permission to take whatever that thing is and share it with other people. The way that you get these permissions is not just by people posting stuff on their personal webpage and not putting copyright at the bottom, so you assume it's okay for you to use because it doesn't say copyright. Creative Commons is an organization that creates copyright licenses that, instead of saying all rights reserved, like you're used to seeing, says some rights reserved. I reserve some of my rights with regard to this material, but I expressly give you these 5R permissions. so that you're free to make copies, to share those, to remix them, to keep them, to edit them, to use them in a wide range of ways. And one of the hats I wear is I'm the Education Fellow at Creative Commons right now, so I can answer more Creative Commons questions in depth if you want later. The Creative Commons licenses come in a couple of flavors, where all of the licenses require attribution. So you get this open textbook and you decide you want to take it, make some changes to it, and give it out to all of your students. And you have permission to do that under the Creative Commons license, as long as you attribute, based on material originally written by Peter Rich. Right? So all of the licenses include this attribution requirement. And then some of the Creative Commons licenses have some other requirements, like a non-commercial clause that prevents material from being used for primarily for profit-making purposes, a share-alike clause that says any derivative works, any remix, any revision that you make of this material, you're required to share back with the rest of the community under the same license that I shared the original version of it with you under. And then no derivatives means essentially you don't get all 5 of the 5R permissions. You just get retain, reuse, and redistribute. But you don't have permission to make any changes. You can just make verbatim copies and give them out to your heart's content. So, this guy looks like an angry sting. I'm not sure who he is. John did these parts of the slides, but I'm fascinated by this guy. So there's kind of a notion that we all grow up with, that you get what you pay for. Like when you pay more for a computer, you expect it to be a nicer computer than a cheaper computer. When you pay more for a car, you expect it to be a nicer car than a cheaper car. When you pay more for college education at one institution, you expect it to be a better education than a cheaper one. So there's this ingrained notion that you get what you pay for, and if OER are available for free, then by definition, kind of any other educational resource ought to be more valuable than it because it doesn't cost anything. So I'm going to hand it over to John, who's going to talk about the research around this question in particular.
So it's been 5 years since I graduated from IP&T, and when I would come to these seminars, I typically sat in the far back where Dr. Williams was sitting, and would multitask on my computer and get lots of stuff done. So I have no bitter feelings towards anyone who is multitasking and getting stuff done. But I hope that you are catching part of the vision here, that students in America are spending billions of dollars on textbooks that really is a waste of money. In many instances, there is a comparable textbook available for free online. And one of the biggest obstacles right now, and I am unabashed in asking you to help, this is why I hope to see you in the Research and OER class next semester, is performing research to really get at this question. Are, in fact, free open educational resources inferior to paid commercial resources? So the short version of the answer is right here. To date, there have been 11 peer-reviewed studies that have tried to tackle this question, looking at efficacy when you have head-to-head OER being used versus a traditional textbook. What has been the difference? So across these 11 studies, we've involved over 48,000 students. 93% of the time, students using open textbooks receive the same or better outcomes. Now that sounds like a lot, 48,000 students, 11 studies, but that's just a drop in the bucket compared to what needs to be done. In fact, just last week I was speaking with one of the associate vice presidents of BYU on a different topic, and the subject of OER came up, and we had not talked about it for more than 30 seconds when they said, well, you get what you pay for, and we just kind of moved on. In this person's mind, the whole idea, the whole concept that a free calculus textbook could be as good as a $200 textbook, they just couldn't get over it. So a lot more research, I think, is needed in this area, and we'll dive deep into some of these 11 studies in just a moment. But first I want to talk about one other kind of meta-analysis here. So there have been 9 studies, peer-reviewed studies, looking at the quality of OER, where students or professors are giving their perceptions of the quality of OER. Across these studies, there have been 4,500 professors and students who've either been interviewed or surveyed. And what you get consistently across these studies is roughly half saying open textbooks are as good as traditional textbooks, 35% saying open textbooks are better, and 15% saying they're worse. So across both these sets, you're seeing between 85 and 95% as good or better success rates, and you're saving a student $1,000 a semester. And you could think about, now this in some ways applies a little bit less to an IP&T student from the cost side, right? Because you're taking specialized courses, and there may not be an open textbook available in this specialized course you're taking. But for Biology 100, Psychology 101, US History, College Algebra, there are well put together resources available for all of these courses. So let's dive deep into a couple. This first one's done by a former EMEI student, TJ Bliss. And I hope that someone in this room will write an article that's as good or better than this one. As you'll see, it's a pretty simple article, but it's had a valuable impact on the field. Basically, the study identified a group of teachers across several colleges who had adopted open textbooks. 58 teachers were surveyed about their use of the open textbooks. And you can see this is sort of what we would expect from the previous slide. 26% of teachers said their students were more prepared than usual when using the open textbook. 63% said they were equally prepared. 11% said their students were less prepared. Similarly, teachers were asked about how would you compare the quality of this open textbook compared to the traditional textbook that you used to use. 35% said it was better, 54% said it was the same, 11% said it was worse. Bliss also interviewed 491 students to talk to them about their perspectives. It was again the same story. 55% say it's the same quality, 39% say it's better, 6% said it was worse. So this is just one of the one of the 9 perception studies, and more needs to be done. There would be some great opportunities. We have connections to people who are adopting open textbooks and would welcome a student such as yourself doing a perception study. How are people perceiving the quality of this text? Let's take a look at another study. This is perhaps my favorite of all the OER efficacy studies, because although the research design is not perfect, few education research designs are, I think the researchers did some clever things to try to address some perhaps problems that could come up. So this is happening at UC Davis, and they've got 2 classes. And the classes are taught the same semester at back-to-back times. You've got the same faculty member teaching both classes, same teaching assistants running it. Identical lectures are used in each section. The only difference is in one of the sections, both sections have about 450 students. In one of the sections, students are assigned a textbook called ChemWiki. So this is all building off an open educational resource. It's been designed into a free digital textbook. And the other course, there's about a $200 chemistry textbook that students are assigned to read. Everything else, totally the same. They tried to control for as many variables, including students in both sections take the same midterm and final exam. And so what they found, interestingly enough, is no significant difference between the 2 groups, not only with overall exam results, but they broke it down to the item-specific level. So on question 25, was there a difference between the 2 groups? And neither at the item level nor at the whole class level was there any significant difference. Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, boy, what a discouragement. You can't even make a better textbook. So why should we celebrate this if there's no gain in learning outcome? Well, that's the $1.3 trillion debt problem that we talked about earlier, which will explode, and you and me will end up paying for it at one point in time or another. So I think it behooves us to start addressing that problem sooner than later. So they did a couple of other things that were interesting, including student surveys regarding time spent on the class, and the 2 groups again spend about the same amount of time. So the headline that ran, approximately $500,000 has been saved in textbook expenditures since March. This is just at 1 college, 1 class. So the numbers are real. Scott.
So criticism, I've heard of this. I'd love to hear your rebuttal. Is that true? That's what happened, but we don't know if they actually used the text. But maybe there's a good lecture, no significant difference because the lecture was good and neither class really needed a textbook.
So
was that addressed in the, because I've heard People talk like that.
So let's assume that that's true.
Yeah.
So why are you requiring me to buy a $200 textbook?
It's ridiculous.
If your lecture is so awesome,
Yeah.
so you're right. Like one hypothesis is that this textbook is as good as the other one.
Yeah.
Like a related hypothesis is neither textbook is good. Students don't read them. It's all a waste. Well then, great. Let's save $1.3 trillion and not buy it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
I don't know how you study this, but it seems like OER gives you an opportunity to re-examine what a textbook is. Textbooks are terrible. They're boring and they summarize the interesting stuff that other people have said and make it boring. But if you go to the original sources, they still have all the provocative, imaginative, and challenging questions embedded in the original source. So it seems like you could bypass that middleman, the intellectual middleman that textbooks have become, and go directly to more interesting sources, which I mean, I think it opens you up to re-examine the whole textbook idea.
True, and as we'll see later on in one of the other studies, you do tend to find like a bigger gain when adopting open textbooks is a lever to re-exploring all my pedagogy, right? Because we were actually, if you think about it, this sort of makes sense. If you just swap out a textbook, what change do I expect to have happen? What's my theory of change that's going to say new textbook is totally different? It's going to be something that gets...
It's the same textbook, but just cheaper, that's one
Right.
thing, but if actually has
Or if it
something-
changes my pedagogy in such a way that now students are doing more or doing something different that leads to learning. But
John,
again,
can I respond to Scott's?
Yeah.
Before you go on?
actually, before you do that, I want to close the loop on this. And so I don't think that we're advocating that adopting an open textbook is going to radically improve pedagogy in your classroom. But we are trying to be pragmatic and realistic that for the average person, professor on the street, look, I'm trying to get my research done. So I got to teach a few classes. What's the fastest way? You want me to retool my whole class? No way, I don't have time for that. Oh, you want me to swap out a textbook? Maybe I could do that. So we're trying to look at a solution that is implementable by a wide variety of faculty. Back to you, Scott.
So Scott, there's a really interesting question here, I think, which is what is the, theoretically, a priori, what is the upper limit we would expect? What's the ceiling on the contribution to learning that materials make? Bigger than the effect of the teacher? Bigger than the effect of the student and their background? Like, what's the maximum contribution materials could possibly make? And if you make this argument, the devil's advocate argument that you were making, that it's really, really tiny, then that poses an interesting existential question to the field of instructional design of
One textbooks.
why do we exist? Like, if educational materials don't contribute,
Yeah.
or contribute such a small amount compared to teacher and whoever else, it's just a total wash, what are we doing? I don't believe that's true, but that's the ultimate end of that argument, right? Is why do we even need instructional designers, because materials don't make a difference anyway.
So has anyone done research particularly on that question itself, the efficacy of the textbook compared to the, you know what I'm saying? And that's the only criticism I've heard about this, and I was wondering if research has been done there.
Yeah,
Why
my
better?
mind is soft on the book. I know lots of you have read it. It's giant meta-analysis of different instructional interventions.
John Hattie's Visible Learning.
Yeah, so Visible Learning does talk about it, and its textbook is low on the list. There's lots of other interventions I could adopt as an instructor. They'll give me more bang for my buck than textbook. So Hattie's meta-analysis is the best that I've seen. I welcome, like, if someone else has seen something different, I'd love to learn more as well. Yeah, question?
To me?
Please.
I guess this is kind of off of this discussion. Say the open textbooks or whatever starts to catch on a lot. What kind of reactions are expected from the publishers or those who make the regular textbooks?
Cheers. It's actually funny. So that let me answer that question by showing you this next article. I'll give you a quick summary of it, and then I'll talk about publisher reaction to this study. So this study just came out in the last week or two, and I just want to read the title because I love it. It's one of those multi-syllabic titles. You gotta love that as you're
It's missing a colon.
I was gonna say the same thing.
It's in the article. Sorry about that. A multi-institutional study of the impact of open textbook adoptions on the learning outcomes of post-secondary students. In other words, How do open textbooks influence post-secondary students? So what's great about this study, and I'm biased because I'm one of the authors on it, is it's by far the largest of its kind. And we would invite you to participate in follow-on studies. So our original sample had 16,727 students. And it's a complicated story, but we basically have two parts of the study. So in one part of the study, we wanted to compare students who were taking calculus using an open textbook versus students taking calculus with a traditional textbook. And for a variety of reasons, that eliminated a lot of students to get a pool, because we had to narrow it down only to 15 classes that were there were some in both groups. So in that part of the analysis, we had 10,000 students left in treatment and control. A lot of text on this slide, but the short version is out of the 15 classes, in 9 of them, there was no significant difference in performance. In 5 of them, students using open textbooks did better, and in 1 of them, they did worse. Better and worse are in metrics like completed the course or passed the course with a C- or better. Probably the most interesting part of this study, and for this one, we did bring back all 16,000 students from the original pool. We did something called propensity score matching, which we don't need to go into all the details, but for those of you who don't know, what this is basically doing is trying to mimic randomization by finding people who, in this case, were of the same age, same gender, same racial status. So we're trying to match people on these factors. And what we found was that students who took courses that utilized open textbooks, on average, took 2 credits more than their counterparts in the control group. And the semester following their use of an open textbook took 1.5 credits more than the controls. So what this is a kind of addressing the argument that here at BYU, you tend to be a full-time student, so you pay the same amount of tuition and you take 12 credits, 15 credits, it doesn't matter. But in many community colleges, you're paying per credit. And so in some instances, the cost of the textbook may be more expensive than the cost of the tuition credits. And so if my textbook is free, I now have extra money to take more classes. So this is sort of exploring the idea that open textbooks could actually increase completion rates and increase the time, or excuse me, decrease the time to graduation. So Huffington Post wrote an article about this study, and there's a couple of nice comments, and then there's a couple of really mean comments. And one of them, he signs his name, so I was just curious, and so I Googled his name. Turns out he's like the executive, I can't remember his exact title, but something like executive director of the American Higher Education Textbook Publishing Group.
He's the executive, he's the director of higher education for the American Publishing Association.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, interesting. And so, I mean, at some point it's sort of hard, right? I mean, you look at a news article and you see something great about Mormons, and there's going to be a lot of like negative comments about Mormons. So here you have a nice article about OER. And I would encourage you to go to Huffington Post and read the comments for yourself, because I'm obviously too biased to give a reasoned response. David was less. He gave a very long reasoned response to one of their comments. But basically they were sort of ludicrous, and you could tell, I mean, like, I understand, right? If I was a traditional publisher and my living is made on publishing expensive textbooks, this is a very disruptive and discouraging model. But I think there is a reality that you and I face as taxpayers, because we're the ones who are funding student loans. What are we getting for this money? And the research is showing not very much. I'm going to turn it to David to do a couple more studies that are at this time in press. So we're going to the cutting edge now, and then we'll open it up for questions for the last couple minutes.
So this is the study with the worst title ever in the history of educational studies. And we would all be happy to buy milkshakes for anyone who can come up with a better name.
Has a colon.
For this study. Yes, but it does have a colon.
Improvement.
An improvement. So this study is basically establishing a framework for asking the question, what do we get for the money we spend? And particularly it's asked in this way. For the amount of money that we ask students to spend on required materials, what % of them are completing with a C or better? And the original assumption would be that It's an up and to the right relationship, right? For materials that are very inexpensive, they're not going to support a lot of learning. Materials that are really whiz-bang and cost a lot of money are going to result in better learning. So I guess I'm sad or glad in either of these cases. If I don't spend a lot, don't learn a lot, spend a lot, learn a lot, okay. But if I'm asked to spend a lot, but I don't learn much, that just makes me angry. But if there's some way that I could not be asked to spend a lot, but I could still do very well, then that would be awesome. So I'm going to skip over one slide or two because they didn't transfer in very well, and go to this one that shows those same 15 courses that John just talked about in the Journal of Computers in Higher Ed article. We went back and looked at the bookstore website and actually got the cost of the required textbooks off of the bookstore website for each of these courses at each of the places where they were offered. And where'd my pointer go? And you see a couple of interesting things here, right? So here's all the OER-based courses down here, kind of laying on the bottom. And then here are the kind of traditional courses. I think the two things that are most interesting here is that the lowest of the low in terms of student success rates is among OER, and the highest of the high of student success rates is among OER, showing that there's kind of greater variability of efficacy among the OER, which you would sort of expect because they're produced by different people with different funding, with different incentives under different models, so there's more variability in quality here. Another thing that is interesting, though, is that if you look at where the average of this cluster of dots compared to the average of this cluster of dots, the OER are slightly further to the right. And going back to our hypothesis about things going up and to the right, if you take out the OER dots and plot the best fitting line through all the 15 sections, or the 15 sections of these courses that use commercial textbooks, the line actually goes down and to the right, not up and to the right. The more expensive they are, the less well students tend to do. And that could be explained in a range of ways, but we don't go into that in the article. The other, I just want to mention, this will be appearing in December in Education Policy Analysis Archives. This is looking at a program at Tidewater Community College in Virginia, where they have an entire degree program that has moved away from commercial textbooks and now uses OER, so that you can graduate with an Associate's of Business degree without ever being asked to buy a textbook. And this is looking at their drop data. And so, a lot of the other efficacy studies that John showed really focus on the impact on the student. This one's about impact on the institution. When a student drops a course, when you drop before the add drop deadline, what happens? If you drop before the add drop deadline, you get your money back, or you get some portion of your money back, right? But from the institution side, that's money that's come in that now I have to give back to you. So drops are bad financially for the institution, in addition to being bad for you because it slows you down on your way toward graduation and other things. But if you look at the difference in drop rate, which is about 1% across sections, the Z sections of these courses are courses using open educational resources. The non-Z sections are sections that don't use them yet. If you look at that difference in drop rate and you model that out over the number of people who aren't dropping times the percentage of people who are in-state students and what they pay per credit hour for a 3-credit class, and then do the same thing again for students, or the percentage of students that are out of state and what they pay per credit for a 3-credit class, you'll see that by creating this program that saves students lots of money, the institution also does not refund over $100,000 a year. They're actually holding on to tuition money that they would have refunded before. So in addition to being beneficial for students, there are actually benefits to the institution as well. Last slide. Last year, the Babson Survey Research Group did a great survey, national survey of faculty, talking to them about their awareness of OER, their receptivity toward OER, and things like this. This survey just came out what day is today? It's Wednesday, because we're here. This came out last week. This was commissioned by Inside Higher Ed, which is kind of like the Chronicle, and conducted by Gallup. And I know this is really small, so I'll read it to you, but Gallup asked faculty questions about textbooks. Thinking now about the costs of textbooks and other course materials, in your opinion, are course materials, including textbooks, priced too high? 93% of faculty said that they were. If you're interested in technology administrators' opinions, 98% of them said that they were. Should faculty members make cost a significant concern when assigning course materials? Only 82% of faculty said yes. But when you look at this 93 number of faculty thinking they're too high, when faculty were asked, should faculty members assign more OER, 92% of them said yes. So it's interesting data, just that in the past, faculty have been kind of less dialed in what materials cost, what the impact of materials cost on students have been, but they're becoming more aware. More than 9 out of 10 say that textbooks cost too much, and more than 9 out of 10 say we should be assigning more OER in place of commercial textbooks. So that seems like a really encouraging trend, and it's kind of timely because it was just published last week. So that's the last slide. And anybody other than Peter that has a question, we'd love to. Oh, okay, Peter.
Hey, question for you. I don't know, we opened up this question on the publishers. One of the things that I've been thinking about as you've done this, you started off saying there are other ways to pay for resources, through grants and other models, which you know very well. I'm wondering if there are any efforts to work with a well-known publisher, perhaps, to have them maybe even shift their own model of charging and creating the cost of creating textbooks, or maybe they buy into work with a government grant to create open educational resources. I know that sounds like taking the golden eggs away from Jack or the guy whoever's got them right now, and taking away their goose, right? But at the same time, realizing that Jack's coming. Are there any efforts that way, or have there been any discussions that you know of with major publishers about them creating open educational resources through different funding models?
So in order, I think the answers are no, yes, no, no, yes, no. Two big examples there. Okay, so one, the race to the top money that went to the state of New York.
Okay.
New York said, we've got this huge money that we've just received from the federal government. We want Common Core aligned, or codename college and career ready educational materials in English and math. And here's the deal, we're willing to pay for you to create them, but after they're created, we will own the copyright and we will place an open license on them. Public bid process, anybody who's interested in several $1 million to create these materials, go. And not a single commercial publisher replied to their RFP. Similar process that just happened last year here in the West. There's a group of states working together under the umbrella of the K-12 OER Collaborative, who have pooled money together as state K-12 offices from foundations and from themselves, and said, we want to do something similar. We want to commission the creation of new educational materials that we will pay well for, but after they're built, because we paid for them, we're going to own them and we're going to put an open license on them. And again, no commercial publisher responded to the RFP. It was all kind of smaller, lesser known organizations. It was Expeditionary Learning in New York that won that contract. And the stuff with the K-12 OER Collaborative is still playing out, but there are no major publishers who responded. The closest example that you can find is, oddly enough, Wiley Publishing, no relation, has shown some willingness to align their commercial supplemental materials with open textbooks. To say, well, if you're not going to buy our textbook, if you're going to use that whatever open textbook, at least buy our homework system to go with it. Right, so they're packaging their kind of supplemental add-on offerings and aligning them in ways to try to make it easy for you to, if you're not going to spend $200, at least spend $80, with us. And that's really the closest, best example that you can find right now.
So they don't touch it with a 10-foot scale. So they don't touch it with a 10-foot scale, right?
No, it's classic innovator's dilemma, right? They're structurally unable, incapable of moving in this direction of granting permissions to people because their entire business model is built on royalties. And the idea of OER is that there aren't royalties. So there's just no way for them to go there.
I think it'd be interesting to break down a single textbook and say like Chem 101 or Physical Sciences 101 and say, okay, well, over the life of this textbook, here's typically what we make off of it, so here's what a grant would have to offer for us to look at that as a viable model.
I mean, so John's showed some price savings on chemistry just at UC Davis, right? It got, was it $500,000 for the semester or for the year?
Those for the year.
For the year.
Yeah.
So a hard sciences book like that will cost $750,000 to $1 million to produce. So if 2 institutions adopt it for a year, you've made back your $1 million, but those books are adopted by more than just 2 institutions, right? So to try to compensate by paying the amount, not that they spend producing it, but to try to compensate for the royalty loss. I mean, the way that Pearson does over $1 billion a year, not in gross, but in profit, is by selling really, really expensive textbooks that don't cost that much in the grand scheme of things for them to create.
Any other questions?
I don't know if I want to take this offline, but how do you see as more and more textbooks are moving to like courseware, where it's not just content, but it's like a, intelligent tutoring system or some other thing? How do you see open educational resources being able to compete with publishers in that domain?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, so I think in some instances there are, so one of David's other stats is working with Lumen Learning. So Lumen Learning works with institutions who are trying to adopt OER to answer this very question. So in some instances, for example, with math, there is a comparable MyOpenMath homework assignment generator to the Wiley
Pearson My Math Lab.
Pearson, yeah, thank you, Pearson My Math Lab. So in some instances there are, my hypothesis, I'd love to hear yours, is that as that becomes more mainstream, OER will follow, but OER is still, I think, for right now, focused on what the mainstream is, which is textbook adoption.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing there, you see with this move to courseware with adaptive and personalized and intelligent tutoring systems and things like that, that it's being used as a way to charge even more. Because now it's not just, I mean, you're paying $200 just for the content. Now you want an adaptive version of that with algorithms and the cloud and woo, right? I think we have to really keep the conversation focused on efficacy and on these kind of impact studies and this idea of learning outcomes per dollar. And say, your $250 system is great and it produces these kinds of results in students, and here's what a free system does. And maybe it's no significant difference, or maybe the adaptive system does, maybe you get 3% more students completing with a C or better. Is that worth charging all of them $250? I mean, that's a kind of conversation that we've never had in education, asking what's the return, what's the learning return on money spent on educational materials? And it requires an efficacy number to go in the numerator, right? So keeping the conversation focused squarely there is important. And if at the end of the day, if it turns out that commercial content in a commercial adaptive system just beats the pants off of OER, then we should all use commercial content in commercial systems. I mean, neither John nor I are religious or zealous about.
We're religious, just to clarify.
About open. We're always open to the data coming back and saying, it turns out you actually do get what you pay for, and nobody wants to save money at the expense of really hurting student learning. But as long as the data keeps saying that these are very comparable experiences, that I think we just have to keep coming back to efficacy divided by cost and keep the conversation there. And then let the publishers do every innovative, cool, awesome, creative thing they want to do, and let's just measure it in terms of what are the outcomes as a function of what we ask students to pay for it. And let the best approach win.